Have you ever looked at a map of the Roman Empire and wondered why it didn't expand further? Here's a map of Rome in 117 AD under Emperor Trajan, the peak of the empire. As you can see, Rome's control was concentrated around the Mediterranean Sea, while also stretching northwest into Gaul and Britain and controlling some parts further east like Mesopotamia, though only for a brief period. However, there was so much land directly on the borders of the empire, not always owned by major rival powers, seemingly open for conquest. And yet, Rome never conquered them, at least not for long. But why? This video will explain why Rome decided to expand in some circumstances and not in others, also diving deep into why borders stopped where they did. Most notably the east with Persia, the southeast with Arabia, the northeast with Scotland and Germany, and the south in Africa. First of all, it's important to understand what drove Roman expansion. Not all conquests were equally important, but in general, especially early on, Rome was focused on controlling the Mediterranean Sea and the trade routes within it. As time went on and the empire grew more powerful, it expanded further inland, mostly for resources and security, acquiring populated lands with threatening barbarians that were feasible to conquer. From the 1st century BC to the 1st century AD, Rome acquired Gaul, Britain, and the Balkans, solidifying its core frontiers, many of which saw little change afterwards. However, Rome's political structure encouraged war. Generals sought glory, wealth, triumphs, and pursued personal ambitions, such as Pompey in Syria and Caesar in Gaul. But the cost of conquest was also important to consider. If those in charge felt it would be too costly to maintain certain territories or that keeping them wasn't guaranteed, then they would be less willing to pursue invasions expensive in money and manpower. For example, certain parts of Germany had a small and sparse population, which would not offer much tax revenue if conquered. This explains why conquests were large, frequent, and well-funded during the time of the Republic. There was plenty of land ripe for the taking, much of it poorly defended and profitable. However, after the end of the Republic by Augustus, conquest slowed. Not only was maintaining the massive boundaries of the empire difficult, but other factors such as terrain and resistance played a notable role, making further expansion unsustainable. Of course, this doesn't mean that the empire never tried to expand after the year 100, just that its attempts were greatly limited, as we'll soon see. When it came to Persia, Rome did not conquer it because it could not dedicate enough resources to do so, while most attempts ended in failure. In the eyes of Roman leaders, Persia was not exactly seen as a priority, because its lands were not crucial for maintaining the trade routes of the Mediterranean and quite expensive to conquer. However, there were still notable potential gains, like Babylon for its wealth, agriculture, and ability to control trade routes between Europe and the Far East. Armenia in particular was a major point of contention from which the Silk Road ran. In fact, Rome and the Persian empires of the Parthians and later Sassanids fought several wars over the territory. But overcoming Persia's terrain and military capabilities was easier said than done. Persian cavalry was very effective, with highly armored knights smashing Roman infantry lines, the Parthians in particular capable of shooting their bows accurately while retreating. Roman advantages in combat, such as naval superiority and professional infantry, were rendered less effective in the lands of the east with rough mountains and desert, as well as ineffective supply lines so far from home. Roman occupations were difficult to maintain, as the Persian people were proud and independent, having lived in a sophisticated empire for centuries, seeing the Romans as mere plunderers. Because Rome never completely ended a Persian state, it could continue to amass large armies, recruit new forces, and support any rebellions in lands Rome acquired. In fact, Roman failures in Persia were numerous, even when operations initially looked promising. During the 1st century BC, Rome tried to invade Mesopotamia, but resulted in General Crassus and a massive Roman army being crushed at the Battle of Carrhae by Parthian cavalry. The 1st century AD saw the two states compete over the Armenian throne, while the 2nd saw Emperor Trajan conquer Mesopotamia, but his successor Hadrian quickly withdrew. Emperor Severus returned about a century later, re-establishing the province and even reaching the Parthian capital, but never was able to establish permanent control, also retreating. Further campaigns continued against the Sassanids during the 3rd to 5th centuries. Though Emperor Diocletian experienced a period of stability and Galerius saw a great victory in 298, capturing Ctesiphon and the Persian treasury, most campaigns were brief and rapidly abandoned, often resulting in the death or capture of emperors such as Valerian and Julian the Apostate. Therefore, the Roman-Persian frontier remained largely the same during this period, stabilizing alongside towns and fortifications, the two trying to ally or vassalize nearby states. Overall, Rome never conquered Persia for two main reasons: necessity and the difficulties of conquest. Persia was not essential to Rome's control of the Mediterranean, and although it possessed resources and could help secure trade routes, these proved to not be worthwhile given the fierce resistance from the Parthian and Sassanid empires and their peoples. This left the majority of Persia not a part of the Roman Empire, though some regions saw brief periods of occupation. Arabia was never conquered by Rome because it simply was not necessary nor desired, while any attempt to would be costly. It wasn't crucial to control the Mediterranean, while its vast desert was not exactly enticing to annex. However, as we'll soon see, there were a multitude of Roman expeditions into the peninsula, mostly for its resources and trade. Romans have a long history of contact with Arabia. It was a key stop on the way to India for the spice trade after the conquest of Egypt, with reportedly 120 Roman ships sailing every year. Here, Romans obtained the expensive spices of frankincense and myrrh, which came exclusively from southern Arabian trees. Additionally, Arab merchants of the Kingdom of Saba crossed the desert in caravans along the incense route, trading with the Nabateans, who in turn traded with the Romans. But with trade came conflict. The maritime route to India was often disrupted by piracy, leading Emperor Augustus to intervene. In 26 BC, 10,000 legionaries under governor of Egypt Gaius Aelius Gallus sailed to Arabia Felix, reaching the Sabian capital Marib after 6 months due to misdirections from their guide. They besieged Marib for a week, but gave up due to disease, poor supply lines, and the rough desert environment. Though the Roman fleet was able to occupy the port of Eudaimon and secure the Roman trade route to India, no annexation occurred. This campaign shows that Roman interests in Arabia were commercial, not imperial. Gallus's expedition did not aim to annex a large territory, but to control the trade routes of the peninsula. This is supported by the fact that Roman coins were found as far as southern India and Sri Lanka, as well as southern Yemen. But it's not like Rome did not have any imperialist ambitions at all. The Nabatean kingdom of the southern Levant became a client state under Augustus, and after the death of its king in 106 AD, it was conquered. It became the province of Arabia Petraea, with the Romans imposing their culture and building the Via Nova Traiana from Bostra to Aqaba. The province was a key hub for trade, though this declined over time due to sea-based routes. Regardless, Petraea marked the end of Roman expansion in Arabia. It was changed and fortified over the years to defend from Arabian tribes, while the vast desert proved to be a thorn in the side of Roman armies, as shown by Gallus's 26 BC invasion. Annexing Arabia, likely a long and harsh process, wouldn't bring anything to the empire it didn't already have. Rome controlled the Mediterranean and the trade routes to India, while any resources exclusive to Arabia could be purchased. That is why Rome never conquered Arabia. It simply wasn't necessary, with the potential gains not outweighing the negatives. The desert was too harsh, its rewards too limited, while the existing trade routes were already secure. In the case of the north, Caledonia and Germany were quite simply too difficult and not worthwhile to conquer. Like with Persia and Arabia, these regions weren't seen as a priority, as they were not crucial for maintaining the trade routes of the Mediterranean, with the potential gains also not being worth it. But why? Well, the terrain and resistance from locals made conquest incredibly costly and difficult. When it comes to terrain, the two regions had many commonalities, with forests and hills, Caledonia in particular having some larger mountains and swamps, while Germany possessed dense woodlands. Roman armies were high quality, but were at their best in open terrain or uneven ground, not exactly well equipped for these areas. Therefore, fighting in the harsh terrain north of the empire would discourage any ambitions, which wasn't helped by resistance from locals. Evidently, resistance proved to be a major thorn in the side of the empire. Rome did conquer parts of northwestern Germany during Caesar's Gallic Wars, which were further intensified under Augustus, encompassing the Rhine and parts of the Low Countries. However, attempts to go further were unsuccessful, as Germanic tribes united against the Roman threat, causing a massive defeat for the empire at the Battle of Teutoburg Forest. The Roman forces, tired, stuck in the rain, and unable to move through the rough forest, were blocked by an earthen wall crafted by the Germans, being subsequently slaughtered. The Romans returned under Commander Germanicus, with major campaigns of up to 70,000 men, achieving some victories but not securing control, forcing Rome to establish its frontiers along the Rhine and Danube. Rome would continue to fight minor skirmishes, but never again try to complete takeover, instead trying to establish alliances. Caledonia, on the other hand, was invaded by Rome shortly after its conquest of Britain in the 80s AD, with Governor Agricola winning at the Battle of Mons Gropius, but falling back after continued resistance from Caledonian tribes. Hadrian's Wall, followed by the Antonine Wall, were built decades later, marking two different borders before major campaigns continued in the 3rd century. This time, Emperor Septimius Severus attacked Caledonia, passing the Antonine Wall and marching into the highlands. Severus's forces suffered heavy casualties against the Caledonians' guerrilla tactics, the emperor soon deciding to retake Agricola's old forts and ravage the remaining territory. The Caledonians, horrified at what looked to become an extermination, tried to negotiate peace, but to no avail. Severus' son Caracalla went north with orders to loot and burn everything in sight, but the fate of the Caledonians was ultimately saved by Severus' untimely death in 211, with Caracalla calling off the war soon after. The Romans never launched another major attack, keeping its military presence in skirmishes, abandoning Hadrian's Wall by the 4th to 5th centuries. Overall, Rome didn't expand further north, specifically Caledonia and Germany, for three core reasons. Necessity, such as the cost-effectiveness of conquest, rough terrain such as hills and forests, and resistance such as Germanic and Caledonian tribes. Excursions from Emperors Augustus and Severus proved to be far too difficult and expensive, with their successors deciding not to pursue any further, leaving Caledonia and most of Germany never part of the Roman Empire. Necessity and cost-effectiveness was once again the main driver of why Rome didn't expand further into Africa. Conquering the lands outside the boundaries of the Mediterranean was largely not desired, many of them lacking important resources or trade routes. Rome already controlled Egypt, the empire's wealthiest province outside Italy and its main source of grain, making the arid Sahara Desert unattractive. But some parts of sub-Saharan Africa, particularly along the coast, comprised more fertile lands with established civilizations. However, these proved to be more complex to conquer than it may seem. In 24 BC, under Emperor Augustus, recently annexed Roman Egypt was attacked by the Kingdom of Kush and its queen Amonihanas, located in modern-day Sudan. Rome fought back and entered Kush territory, fighting an exhaustive war against fierce Kushite resistance. By 21 BC, Rome was drained of willpower and had to focus on war with the Parthians. Augustus thus accepted Amonihanas' peace offer of independence, also continuing trade between the two states. This marked the last Roman war in Africa where large expansion seemed feasible, as it turned to smaller excursions, not aimed at complete annexation. For a century and a half afterwards, Roman incursions continued into sub-Saharan Africa, attacking various tribes that threatened Roman interests, notably the Garamantes. Unlike other parts of the empire, these expeditions were not outright military attempts to colonize large swaths of territory, but rather aimed to control the trade routes of the continent to secure goods like gold. Roman coins and artifacts were even found as far as the Niger River, the Senegal River, and Lake Chad, likely brought by trade. During this time, Emperor Nero also ordered an expedition of Roman legionaries from southern Egypt, searching for the source of the Nile River, also potentially preparing for the conquest of Kush. However, the death of the emperor halted the operation. The final documented Roman expedition in sub-Saharan Africa occurred in 90 AD, with trader Julius Maternus meeting with the king of the Garamantes, returning to Rome with a rhinoceros and 2 horns, but not pursuing further interventions. Overall, the Roman Empire never conquered more of Africa for a simple reason. It had no need to, while any invasion was costly. Sub-Saharan Africa was difficult to invade and possessed little strategic value to directly control, as demonstrated by Augustus' war against Kush. Additionally, expeditions deeper inland acquired wealth without the need to directly annex land, making most incursions commercial with small armies to secure trade routes. Looking at a map of the Roman Empire, it may seem impossible to believe that anyone, or anything, could stand in its path. But yet, as we've seen, many people did. Not just because of resistance, but because the empire's priorities lay elsewhere. Over time, expansions were halted due to geography, logistics, and the costs of conquests, alongside overextension in managing such a massive empire. In the end, we have a better understanding of why Rome's peak remained at these borders. They represented not just where it could reach, but where it chose to stop. Thank you for watching. If you want to support the channel, like and subscribe, or even become a member to receive benefits like custom emotes and shoutouts at the end of my videos. I appreciate all of your help.